It's just good manners to respect your elders. The passenger insisted, expecting the black teen to surrender the first-class seat he'd earned. The flight attendant, Karen, agreed, seeing only a child who didn't belong. She had no way of knowing the teen was Marcus, and the man he was quietly calling was his father, Elijah Johnson, the billionaire CEO of Next Gen Technologies. Nor did she realize the airline's parent company was desperately trying to close a multi-million-dollar security software deal with Elijah. Karen thought she was solving a minor seating issue. In reality, she was jeopardizing the airline's future. The Atlanta International Airport hummed with activity as 17-year-old Marcus Johnson navigated through the crowded terminal. Despite the chaos surrounding him, he maintained his composed demeanor, moving with purpose toward Gate A23. His eyes occasionally darted to his watch, still 30 minutes before boarding for his flight to New York would begin. Marcus wasn't like most teenagers traveling alone. Behind his quiet exterior and thoughtful brown eyes lay the mind of a certified genius. With a perfect 4.0 GPA at Atlanta's most competitive prep school in coding skills that had already earned him patents, he had secured one of only 5 spots in Columbia University's prestigious summer internship program. The program specifically selected the brightest young minds in technological innovation, a field where black students like Marcus remained significantly underrepresented. Final boarding call for Flight 1982 to Chicago announced a voice over the intercom, temporarily drowning out the soft jazz playing throughout the terminal. Marcus adjusted his navy blue blazer and checked his boarding pass one more time. His father had insisted on purchasing him a first-class ticket, though Marcus had protested, "You deserve the best, son." Elijah Johnson had said while booking the ticket, "You've earned it with your hard work." Zaten. What Marcus never mentioned to anyone at school was that his father, Elijah Johnson, was the founder and CEO of Next Gen Technologies, a rapidly expanding tech company whose innovative security software was revolutionizing the industry. By his father's design, Marcus traveled under his mother's maiden name Davis to maintain his privacy and ensure he made his own way in the world without the shadow of his father's success. "They should let you stand on your own achievements," his father always said. "Not on my name." When the boarding announcement finally came for his flight, Marcus joined the priority boarding line, ticket in hand. He noticed the curious glances from other first-class passengers, mostly older white businessmen and women in expensive suits. Marcus had grown accustomed to being the only black person in premium spaces. "Boarding passes, please," said the gate agent with practiced efficiency, barely glancing up as she scanned tickets. When Marcus reached the front of the line, he handed over his boarding pass. The gate agent looked at it, then at him, then back at the pass with slightly narrowed eyes before forcing a smile. "Enjoy your flight, Mr. Davis," she said, emphasizing his last name as if testing whether he would respond to it. Marcus nodded politely and proceeded down the jet bridge. As he approached the aircraft door flight attendant, Karen Whitley greeted passengers with a bright smile that immediately dimmed when she saw Marcus. "First class is to the left," she said automatically, then stiffened when Marcus turned left rather than right toward economy. He found his seat 2A, a window seat in the second row of first class, and settled in, placing his backpack under the seat in front of him. He was just pulling out his advanced physics textbook when Karen appeared beside him. "Excuse me," she said with a tight smile. "May I see your boarding pass?" Marcus handed it over without comment. He'd been through this routine before the assumption that he must be in the wrong place. Karen examined his boarding pass with unusual scrutiny, turning it over and holding it up to the light as if looking for a watermark. "There must be some confusion," she finally said. "Are you certain this is your seat?" "Yes, ma'am," Marcus replied evenly. "Sat 2A." Karen's mouth formed a thin line. "One moment, please." As she walked away with his boarding pass still in hand, Marcus noticed an elderly white couple hovering in the aisle, watching the interaction with interest. The man, tall with a full head of silver hair and wearing an expensive watch, whispered something to his wife, who nodded emphatically. Karen returned several minutes later, reluctantly handing back his boarding pass. "It seems your ticket is in order," she said, sounding disappointed. However, we have a situation. The Pearsons here," she gestured to the elderly couple, "need to sit together and Mr. Pearson has a first-class ticket. Mrs. Pearson was supposed to be upgraded as well, but there seems to have been a mistake with the system." Marcus looked up at the couple, then at the increasingly crowded aisle as more passengers boarded. "I'd be happy to help," he began, "but I'm afraid I need to remain in first class. I have work to do during the flight." Karen's professional veneer slipped for just a moment. "Young man, this lovely couple has been married for 50 years. Surely you can understand why they need to sit together. There's a perfectly good seat in economy that would accommodate you." The implication was clear. Marcus didn't belong in first class anyway. "I'm sorry, but my father specifically purchased this ticket so I could prepare for my internship during the flight," Marcus explained calmly. Mr. Pearson stepped forward. "Son, I'm sure your father would want you to do the right thing here. It's just good manners to respect your elders." Several other first-class passengers were now watching the interaction with undisguised interest. Marcus felt the familiar discomfort of being the center of unwanted attention. "I understand," Sir Marcus said, maintaining his composure, "but this ticket was purchased specifically for this seat." Karen's smile had completely disappeared. "Now let me be clear. We have an elderly couple who needs to sit together in first class. We have a simple solution that requires just a small sacrifice on your part. I find it difficult to believe that someone your age would be so unaccommodating." More passengers had stopped to watch now. Marcus could hear whispers. "Why doesn't he just move? Kids these days have no respect. Who does he think he is?" Anyway, the captain announced over the intercom that they were experiencing a slight delay and would be on the tarmac for an additional 20 minutes before takeoff. Karen used this as an opportunity to escalate the pressure. "We're already delayed," she said more firmly. "The longer you refuse to cooperate, the longer everyone will have to wait." Another flight attendant, an older white man with a name tag reading Roger, appeared beside Karen. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, looking directly at Marcus rather than Karen. "This young man is refusing to give up his seat to accommodate the Pearsons." Karen explained, "Mrs. Pearson needs to sit with her husband in first class." Roger's expression hardened. "Young man, we need to resolve this quickly. The captain wants all passengers seated." Marcus felt his heart rate increasing, though he kept his expression neutral. This was rapidly becoming a scene exactly what his father had taught him to avoid. But he also remembered his father's other lessons about standing his ground when he was in the right. "I understand the situation," Marcus said, his voice steady despite his internal turmoil. "But I have paid for this specific seat and I need the space and quiet of first class for my work." Roger and Karen exchanged looks. Then Roger leaned down and lowered his voice. "Listen, we have procedures for handling passengers who disrupt the boarding process. I'd hate for this to escalate further." The threat was veiled, but unmistakable. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. He reached for his phone and did something he rarely did. He called his father for help. As the phone rang, Karen's smile returned, clearly believing Marcus was about to capitulate. The Pearsons stood watching Mrs. Pearson clutching her husband's arm with an expression of righteous indignation on her face. Little did any of them know that the person Marcus was calling would change the entire dynamics of this confrontation in ways none of them could imagine. The sleek black phone in Marcus's hand connected after 3 rings. Before he could explain the situation to his father, the captain's voice came over the intercom again. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. I've been informed that we're having some seating issues. We won't be cleared for takeoff until all passengers are properly seated. Thank you for your patience." The announcement sent a ripple of annoyed murmurs through the cabin. Several passengers glared in Marcus's direction, clearly identifying him as the source of the delay. "Dad," Marcus said quietly into the phone, keeping his voice low to avoid creating more of a scene. "I've got a situation on the flight. On the other end of the line, Elijah Johnson sat in his corner office on the 40th floor of Next Gen Technologies headquarters. The Atlanta skyline stretched out behind him through floor-to-ceiling windows as he reviewed documents for a crucial merger negotiation that would take place in less than an hour. "What's happening, son?" Elijah asked, immediately setting aside the papers when he heard the tension in his son's voice. As Marcus began explaining the situation, Karen's expression darkened. She moved closer, hovering over him in what could only be described as an intimidation tactic. "Sir, all electronic devices need to be turned off during our delay," she said loudly enough for Elijah to hear over the phone. "That's not accurate," Marcus replied calmly. "The announcement specifically stated we could use devices until takeoff preparation." Roger returned with another crew member, a burlier man whose name tag identified him as Security Officer Brent Taylor. "Is this the passenger?" Brent asked, looking at Marcus with immediate suspicion. Marcus maintained his composure, though internally his heart hammered against his ribs. This escalation was all too familiar. "Dad," he continued into the phone, "they're suggesting I should be removed from the flight if I don't give up my seat." Elijah's voice remained calm, but took on an edge that Marcus recognized the same tone he used when dealing with difficult business opponents. "Put me on speaker," Elijah instructed. Marcus hesitated. "Are you sure?" "Yes, now." Marcus pressed the speaker button as Brent moved closer. "Young man, you need to comply with crew instructions." Brent said, his hand moving to rest on what appeared to be a taser on his belt. "If you continue to disrupt this flight..." "This is Elijah Johnson," came the crystal clearer voice from the phone. "To whom am I speaking?" The authoritative tone caused Brent to pause momentarily. "Sir, this doesn't concern you," Karen interjected. "Your son needs to follow crew instructions." "My son has a valid first-class ticket and has broken no rules," Elijah stated firmly. "And you've just made a significant mistake in how you're handling this situation." Karen's expression faltered slightly. "Sir, we have procedures." "Yes, I'm familiar with airline procedures," Elijah cut in. "I'm also familiar with discrimination law and the aviation regulations regarding passenger rights. Now, who is your supervising officer on this flight?" As this exchange unfolded, Marcus noticed another passenger had begun recording the interaction on their phone. Others followed suit, sensing something significant was happening. "This is ridiculous," Mr. Pearson interjected. "We just need seats together. My wife has anxiety." Elijah continued, his voice carrying clearly over the speaker. "Officer Taylor, since you've identified yourself as security, I assume you're aware that removing a passenger who has a valid ticket and has broken no rules would constitute an actionable offense." Brent's posture stiffened. "Sir, I'm following protocols." "Then you should know that those protocols require actual rule violations, not convenience for other passengers," Elijah countered. "My son is a minor traveling alone. The airline accepted responsibility for his safe passage when you accepted payment for his ticket." Marcus watched as other passengers began whispering again, but the tone had changed. Some were clearly impressed by his father's knowledgeable response. One passenger, a white businessman in his 40s sitting across the aisle, caught Marcus's eye and gave a subtle nod of support. The confrontation triggered memories for Marcus. Just last semester at Westbrook Academy, he'd faced similar treatment when he was accused of cheating after scoring perfectly on an advanced mathematics exam. The white teacher couldn't believe he'd achieved the score legitimately until his father came to the school with Marcus's previous test records and work samples. "Always keep your dignity," his father had told him after that incident, "but never let them push you down when you're in the right." Karen's face had wrined considerably. "Sir, we're simply trying to accommodate an elderly couple." At the expense of my son's legitimate seat assignment, Elijah replied, "I purchased that specific seat for a reason." Brent stepped forward again. If this continues to cause a disruption, the businessman across the aisle suddenly spoke up. "Excuse me, but I've been watching this whole interaction, and the only disruption is coming from your staff. This young man has been completely polite and reasonable." Karen turned to the businessman with a suddenly bright smile. "Sir, we appreciate your concern. Actually, we might be able to offer you an upgrade to our premium cabin on your next flight for your patients today." The stark difference in treatment wasn't lost on anyone watching. Several passengers exchanged uncomfortable glances. Another flight attendant, A young black woman whose name tag read Jasmine had been observing from a distance. She approached cautiously. "Karen, can I speak with you for a moment?" she asked quietly. As they stepped aside, Marcus heard Jasmine whisper, "His ticket is completely valid. We can't remove him without cause." "It could be a serious issue for the airline," Karen shot back. "That ticket has to be wrong. Look at him. How does someone like that afford first class?" Though she had attempted to speak quietly, her words carried in the now hushed cabin. Several passengers looked away in embarrassment, while others continued recording. Meanwhile, on the phone, Elijah was taking action. As the CEO of a major technology company on the verge of a historic merger, he had connections. While maintaining the call with Marcus, he had his assistant connect him to the airline's corporate offices. "This is Elijah Johnson of Next Gen Technologies," he said to someone on another line, his voice still audible on Marcus's speaker. "I need to speak with someone about an incident occurring on Flight 457 from Atlanta to New York involving my son." The name Next Gen Technologies caused a visible reaction among some of the first-class passengers. The company had been making headlines for months due to its revolutionary security software and pending public offering expected to value the company at billions. Back in the cabin, Brent had moved closer to Marcus's seat. "Fake ticket or not, if you're causing a scene, I have authority to remove you," he said in a low voice. Marcus, still holding the phone with his father on the line, looked directly at Brent. "My ticket is legitimate and I haven't broken any rules. What's happening right now is being recorded by multiple passengers, and my father is on the line with your corporate office." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Brent's face. The captain's voice came over the intercom again. "Flight attendants, please prepare for departure." Karen returned, visibly flustered. "This isn't over," she muttered to Marcus before addressing the Pearsons. "I'm so sorry about this situation. Let me find you the best possible solution." As the confrontation temporarily de-escalated, Marcus took a deep breath. He put the phone back to his ear. "Dad, I think they're backing down for now," he said quietly. "I'm still here, son," Elijah replied. "And I'm handling this at a higher level. Don't worry." What neither Marcus nor the flight crew realized was that Elijah Johnson was not just making a complaint. He was about to dramatically change the power dynamics of the entire situation. The atmosphere on the plane crackled with tension, like the air before a thunderstorm. Marcus remained in his seat phone still connected to his father as Karen reluctantly guided the Pearsons to separate seats. Mr. Pearson in first class and Mrs. Pearson in the front row of economy. The elderly woman's complaints were loud and pointed with frequent glances back at Marcus. "In my day, young people respected their elders," she announced to no one in particular. "Some people just don't know their place anymore. Have you ever witnessed someone being treated unfairly because of how they looked? Comment number 1. If you've seen discrimination happen in public spaces like this, would you have spoken up for Marcus or stayed silent? Hit that like button if you believe standing up for yourself is always the right thing to do, even when it's difficult. And subscribe to see more stories about turning the tables on discrimination. But what was Elijah Johnson doing on the other end of that phone call that would change everything? And why did the airline have so much reason to fear his next move? Behind the scenes, a power shift of seismic proportions was underway. In his downtown office, Elijah Johnson had activated a network that few knew he possessed. While maintaining the call with Marcus, he had his executive assistant connect him to Lawrence Phillips, the CEO of Atlantic Global Airways parent company. Lawrence, Elijah said when the call connected his voice, carrying the weight of someone accustomed to making billion-dollar decisions. "We have a situation that requires your immediate attention." The timing couldn't have been more significant. What no one on the plane knew was that Atlantic Global Airways was one of the companies seeking partnership with Next Gen Technologies for their revolutionary security software, a deal potentially worth hundreds of millions. Moreover, Elijah's company was considering a substantial investment in the airline parent company as part of their diversification strategy. "Elijah, this is unexpected," Lawrence replied, surprise evident in his voice. "I thought we were meeting next week to discuss the partnership. We were Elijah confirmed. But right now, my 17-year-old son is being harassed by your staff on Flight 457 from Atlanta to New York. They're threatening to remove him from a first-class seat I purchased because they'd prefer to give it to an elderly white couple. There was a moment of silence on the line. That's unfortunate, Lawrence finally said, his tone shifting to concern. I'll look into it immediately. I suggest you do more than look into it, Elijah replied. Because right now, multiple passengers are recording your staff, suggesting my son doesn't belong in first class, implying his ticket must be fraudulent, and threatening him with removal despite breaking no rules. While this conversation unfolded back on the plane, passengers had begun posting clips of the confrontation to social media. The hashtag #JohnFirstClass, while black, was already gaining traction, with the first videos reaching thousands of views within minutes. Marcus, unaware of the corporate machinations his father had set in motion, watched as Brent, the security officer, received a call on his radio. The officer's expression changed from smug confidence to confusion as he listened to the voice on the other end. But Sir Brent protested into his radio, moving toward the front of the cabin for privacy. The situation requires intervention. Whatever response came through the radio caused Brent's shoulders to stiffen. He glanced back at Marcus with an unreadable expression. Meanwhile, Jasmine, the sympathetic flight attendant, casually passed by Marcus's seat and leaned down as if adjusting something. "Whatever's happening, it's big," she whispered. "The captain just got a call from Regional Director Simmons. I've never seen that happen before." Marcus nodded slightly, maintaining his composed exterior while his mind raced. His father had always taught him about leveraging advantage in difficult situations, but he'd never witnessed it happening on this scale. A few rows ahead, Karen was summoned to the galley area for what appeared to be an intense conversation with the head flight attendant. Her gestures became increasingly defensive, and when she emerged, her face was flushed with a combination of anger and embarrassment. Across the aisle, the businessman who had defended Marcus earlier caught his attention. Michael Reynolds. He introduced himself quietly, extending a hand. "I'm a civil rights attorney. That was quite a call you made." Marcus shook his hand. "Thank you for speaking up, sir." "No need to thank me," Reynolds replied. "Though I'm curious, who exactly is your father?" Before Marcus could respond, a ripple of activity at the front of the cabin drew everyone's attention. The captain himself had emerged from the cockpit, an unusual occurrence before takeoff. He was followed by a woman in a crisp Atlantic Global Airways executive uniform who hadn't been on the plane before. The captain made his way directly to Marcus's seat, navigating the narrow aisle with purpose. The contrast to the previous confrontation couldn't have been more stark. "Mr. Davis," the captain said, using Marcus's travel name with a respectful nod. "I'm Captain Williams. I want to personally apologize for any inconvenience you've experienced today. We've had a bit of a misunderstanding with our crew." The executive beside him stepped forward. "I'm Vanessa Torres, Elite Passenger Services Director. I'd like to speak with you privately if possible." Marcus, still processing this dramatic turn of events, glanced around at the other passengers, many of whom were watching with undisguised interest. The Pearsons in particular appeared completely baffled by the sudden difference being shown to the young man they had tried to displace. "I'd prefer to stay in my seat if that's all right," Marcus replied calmly. "We've already been delayed, and I wouldn't want to inconvenience the other passengers further." The pointed reminder of the delay, caused entirely by the crew's treatment of him, wasn't lost on Captain Williams, who nodded uncomfortably. "Of course, Miss Torres will ensure you have everything you need for a comfortable flight. And if you'd like to visit the cockpit before we land in New York, consider it an open invitation." As the captain returned to the cockpit, Marcus noticed something else. Karen and Brent were nowhere to be seen. They had been replaced by different crew members who smiled at Marcus with almost excessive warmth as they prepared the cabin for takeoff. "What just happened?" asked an elderly black woman seated behind Marcus, leaning forward with undisguised curiosity. Marcus smiled slightly. "I think my father made a phone call." The woman chuckled appreciatively. "Must have been some phone call." Miss Torres remained beside Marcus's seat. "Mr. Davis, I want to assure you that Atlantic Global Airways takes these situations very seriously. The crew members involved have been reassigned pending a full investigation of this incident. Reassigned? Marcus questioned. You mean they're not on this flight anymore? That's correct, Ms. Torres confirmed. We've brought in replacement crew members to ensure everyone has a positive experience for the remainder of the journey. In the economy section, Marcus could see Mrs. Pearson just gesticulating angrily to a flight attendant pointing repeatedly toward first class. Whatever response she received didn't appear to satisfy her, but for once her complaints weren't creating any action from the crew. As the replacement flight attendants began the safety demonstration, Marcus returned to his phone call. "Dad, what did you do?" Elijah's voice came through calm, but tinged with satisfaction. "I simply made sure they understood who they were dealing with. Son, the CEO of their parent company, and I have some business to discuss next week. I simply moved up part of the conversation. They removed the crew members who were giving me trouble," Marcus informed him, still processing the rapid turn of events. "Good," Elijah replied. "But that's just the beginning. What happened to you today happens to people who don't have the connections I have. This isn't just about solving your problem. It's about making sure they address the system that created it." As the plane finally began taxiing toward the runway, Marcus received a text message from his father. "Don't move. Help is coming." The message seemed odd, given how much had already changed, but Marcus had learned to trust his father's strategies. Whatever was happening behind the scenes was clearly far from over. The massive engines of the Boeing 787 roared to life as Flight 457 finally lifted off from Atlanta's runway, nearly 45 minutes behind schedule. Marcus watched the sprawling city shrink beneath him, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the landscape. The first-class cabin had settled into an uncomfortable quiet, the kind that follows after witnessing something extraordinary but not wanting to acknowledge it directly. Vanessa Torres, the elite passenger services director, had arranged herself in the jump seat near Marcus during takeoff. As soon as the seatbelt sign dinged off, she approached him again with a tablet in hand. "Mr. Davis, we've taken the liberty of adjusting your return flight to our premium first-class service, as well complimentary, of course," she said. Her voice pitched low enough that only he could hear, "and the airline would like to offer you elite status for the remainder of the year." Marcus nodded politely, but said nothing, remembering his father's text. The situation felt surreal. Just 30 minutes ago, he had been threatened with removal from the flight. Also, Torres continued slight desperation creeping into her professional demeanor. "Captain Williams still extends his invitation to visit the cockpit. It's quite a fascinating experience." "Thank you," Marcus replied. "I might take him up on that later." As Torres retreated to speak with other crew members, Marcus reflected on previous experiences with discrimination, incidents that hadn't ended with airline executives scrambling to make amends. Just 3 months earlier, he had been shopping at Bington's, an upscale department store in Buckhead, looking for a gift for his mother's birthday. Despite being well-dressed in pressed khakis and a button-down shirt, he had been followed by security from department to department. When he finally selected an elegant silk scarf, the cashier had asked to see additional identification with his credit card, something he noticed wasn't requested from the white woman who checked out before him. On another occasion, he and his friends had made reservations at an exclusive restaurant to celebrate a science competition victory. Despite the reservation, they were seated near the kitchen while watching other parties who arrived after them being led to premium window tables. The server had repeatedly asked if they were sure about their orders, subtly suggesting less expensive options. These memories washed over Marcus as he observed the now solicitous behavior of the flight crew. The injustice wasn't that he had been mistreated. It was that the mistreatment only stopped because of who his father was. His thoughts were interrupted by a notification on his phone. Opening his social media app, he was startled to see that one of the videos taken by other passengers had already garnered over 50,000 views. The hashtag #OurFirstClass, while black, was trending nationwide, with people sharing similar experiences of discrimination on airlines. In the economy section, Marcus could see Mrs. Pearson still complaining to anyone who would listen occasionally, shooting glares toward the first-class cabin. Her husband seated in first class, but now several rows behind Marcus, kept his eyes firmly fixed on his magazine, apparently wanting no further part in the controversy. A young black woman in her late 20s settled into the seat beside Marcus, which had remained vacant during boarding. She extended her hand with a warm smile. "I'm Zoe Washington. Another upgrade they've suddenly found space for," she said, with knowing irony. "I was in premium economy, but Miss Torres insisted I'd be more comfortable up here. I have a feeling I have you to thank for that." Marcus shook her hand. "Marcus Davis. And I think they're just trying to change the optics of the situation." Zoe laughed softly. "Oh, absolutely. Nothing says we're not discriminating like suddenly finding room for another black passenger in first class." She lowered her voice. "I saw what happened during boarding. You handled yourself impressively." "Well, thanks," Marcus replied. "I've had practice." "Haven't we all?" Zoe agreed with a knowing look. "I'm a marketing executive with Reynolds Financial. Corporate America isn't much different from this flight. You're fine until you try to take a seat someone doesn't think you deserve." As they chatted, Marcus learned that Zoe had navigated similar waters throughout her career, being mistaken for administrative staff, despite her executive position having her ideas attributed to white colleagues being asked to tone down her natural hair for important client meetings. "You learn to pick your battles," she advised, stirring the premium cocktail a flight attendant had rushed to bring her. "Save your energy for the fights that matter." Their conversation was interrupted when the captain's voice came over the intercom again. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Williams. I want to personally apologize for our delayed departure. Atlantic Global Airways prides itself on providing excellent service to all our valued passengers. As a token of our appreciation for your patience, we'll be offering complimentary premium beverages to everyone on today's flight." The announcement was met with appreciative murmurs from around the cabin. Though Marcus noticed several passengers glancing his way, the narrative had clearly shifted. What had been framed as his disruption was now officially acknowledged as a failing on the airline's part. 30 minutes into the flight, a flight attendant appeared with an elaborate meal service just for Marcus, something no other passenger in first class received. The obvious special treatment made him uncomfortable, but he accepted it graciously. "Your father must be someone important," Zoe observed quietly, watching the parade of attention Marcus was receiving. Marcus hesitated before responding. "He runs a technology company, Next Gen Technologies." Zoe's eyes widened with recognition. "Your father is Elijah Johnson. The Elijah Johnson, the one who's about to take his company public in what analysts are calling the most anticipated IPO since Facebook." Marcus nodded, slightly embarrassed by her reaction. "Well, that explains the 5-alarm fire you've apparently set off at this airline," Zoe said with a low whistle. "Next Gen is the company developing that revolutionary security software everyone's talking about." She paused, connecting the dots. "Wait is Atlantic Global, one of the airlines looking to partner with Next Gen for their security systems." Before Marcus could respond, a new notification appeared on his phone. A text from his father. "Just announced major acquisition of CyberShield Inc. press release going out now. Atlantic Global CEO Lawrence Phillips has agreed to a full review of their customer service policies and bias training programs. This isn't just about today, son." As if on cue, Miss Torres appeared beside Marcus's seat again, looking even more attentive than before. "Mr. Davis, Captain Williams was hoping you might be available to visit the cockpit now, before we get into the busier airspace approaching New York." Marcus glanced at Zoe, who gave him an encouraging nod. "Go see what this is really about," she suggested quietly. As Marcus followed Torres toward the front of the plane, he caught snippets of conversations from other passengers, many discussing the breaking business news on their devices. Next Gen just acquired CyberShield. Stock is soaring in after hours. Trading biggest security software merger this year. The business implications of his father's company were far beyond Marcus's immediate concerns, but he understood enough to know that the timing was deliberate. A power move designed to coincide exactly with his flight. When he reached the cockpit door, Torres knocked lightly before using her key to open it. Inside, Captain Williams and his co-pilot turned to greet Marcus with expressions that could only be described as differential. "Mr. Davis," Captain Williams said, extending his hand, "thank you for joining us. I wanted to personally assure you that what happened during boarding does not reflect the values of Atlantic Global Airways or my crew." The co-pilot nodded in agreement. "We've received direct communication from corporate headquarters about your situation. Apparently, there's been quite a stir." Marcus took in the sophisticated array of instruments and displays that surrounded the pilots. "It's an impressive cockpit," he said, deliberately not addressing the subtext of their comments. "It is indeed," Captain Williams agreed, launching into an explanation of the aircraft systems, clearly relieved to change the subject, as the captain showed him various features. The co-pilot leaned closer to Marcus. "Between us," he said quietly, "I've never seen anything like the response your situation generated. We got a call directly from Regional Director Simmons, who said he was on with corporate headquarters. Whatever your father said to them, it went straight to the top." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "My father believes in accountability." After the cockpit tour concluded, Torres escorted Marcus back to his seat. As he settled in, Zoe gave him a questioning. "Look, they're scared," Marcus confirmed quietly. "Really scared," good Zoe replied with satisfaction. "Fear is sometimes the only language corporations understand. Your father just gave them an expensive lesson." As the flight continued toward New York, Marcus received another text from his father. This one, including a link to a business news article that had just been published. The headline read, "Next Gen Technologies acquires CyberShield in landmark deal. CEO Johnson emphasizes corporate responsibility in new ventures." The article quoted his father directly. "Companies that partner with Next Gen are expected to uphold the highest standards of ethical conduct and equitable treatment for all. This isn't just about technology. It's about creating systems that serve everyone fairly." The message couldn't have been clearer, and Marcus understood now why his father had told him not to move. This wasn't just about resolving an unpleasant incident. It was about leveraging that incident to force broader change. As the plane began its initial descent toward New York, Marcus wondered what would await him when they landed. Whatever his father had set in motion was clearly far from over. The computerized voice from the aircraft system announced, "Cabin crew, prepare for landing," as Flight 457 began its final approach into JFK International Airport. The New York skyline glittered against the darkening eastern sky, a forest of lights emerging as dusk settled over the city. For Marcus, the view represented new possibilities. Both the upcoming Columbia internship and the unexpected turn his journey had taken. The transformation in his treatment since his father's intervention had been nothing short of remarkable, where hours earlier he had been threatened with removal from the plane. Now the entire crew treated him with a difference that bordered on obsequious. As if to underscore this reversal, a flight attendant appeared beside his seat, leaning down with a conspiratorial smile. "Mr. Davis, we've arranged for priority deplaning for you. As soon as we reach the gate, Miss Torres will escort you out before other passengers." Marcus shook his head slightly. "That won't be necessary. I'm happy to deplane with everyone else." The flight attendant appeared momentarily confused by his refusal of special treatment. "Are you certain it's no trouble at all?" "I'm sure," Marcus confirmed. "But thank you." From across the aisle, Michael Reynolds, the civil rights attorney who had spoken up earlier, gave Marcus an approving nod. "Smart move," he commented quietly. "Refusing special treatment keeps the moral high ground." Zoe leaned closer to Marcus. "Not to mention it avoids antagonizing the other passengers any further." She added, "The Pearsons are still glaring daggers your way." Indeed, Mr. Pearson had spent much of the flight sending resentful looks toward Marcus, while his wife continued her vocal complaints in economy. Their sense of entitlement had not diminished even as the power dynamics had completely reversed as the plane touched down with a gentle bump and the thrust reversers engaged with their characteristic roar. Marcus's phone lit up with another message from his father. "Atlantic Global CEO Lawrence Phillips has agreed to meet us at the terminal. This conversation is moving to the next level. I've arranged transportation for you from the gate." Marcus showed the message to Zoe, whose eyebrows rose in surprise. "The CEO himself at the terminal," she whispered. "That never happens. Your father must have some serious leverage." I'm beginning to realize that Marcus admitted. When the seatbelt sign finally dinged off, passengers began the usual rush to retrieve luggage and exit the aircraft. Marcus remained seated, following his father's instruction to wait. Miss Torres hovered nearby, her attention still fixed on him despite his refusal of priority deplaning. "Mr. Davis," she said as the cabin gradually emptied, "I'll escort you to the meeting point when you're ready." Marcus nodded, gathering his backpack and following her toward the exit. As he passed through first class, he noticed Mr. Pearson had already departed, apparently eager to avoid any further interaction. Captain Williams stood at the aircraft door personally thanking each first-class passenger for flying with Atlantic Global. When Marcus approached, the captain's demeanor shifted from professional courtesy to something approaching genuine remorse. "Mr. Davis," he said, extending his hand, "I want to personally apologize again for your experience today. What happened was unacceptable." Marcus shook his hand, recognizing the sincerity in the man's eyes. "Thank you, Captain Williams." As he stepped into the jet bridge, Marcus was surprised to see Karen and Brent standing off to one side, flanked by airline officials in corporate attire. Their expressions were a mixture of apprehension and resentment as they watched him exit the plane. Miss Torres guided Marcus past them without acknowledgement, leading him through a side door that bypassed the regular terminal route. They emerged into a private reception area where several people waited, including his father. Elijah Johnson cut an impressive figure in his tailored charcoal suit, his commanding presence drawing the eye despite the room's other occupants. At 45, with closely cropped salt and pepper hair and penetrating dark eyes, he embodied the confidence of someone who had built something significant from nothing. Beside him stood an older white man with silver hair and an expensive suit, presumably Lawrence Phillips, the airline's CEO, along with several other executives whose nervous expressions suggested they understood the gravity of the situation. Marcus Elijah said, warmly embracing his son, before turning to the airline representatives, "Gentlemen, this is my son, the young man your employees threatened to remove from his rightfully purchased seat based on nothing more than his appearance." Lawrence Phillips stepped forward, extending his hand to Marcus. "Mr. Davis, or should I say Mr. Johnson, I'm Lawrence Phillips, CEO of Atlantic Global Airways. I want to express my deepest apologies for what occurred on your flight today." The use of both surnames wasn't lost on Marcus. Phillips clearly wanted to acknowledge that he understood exactly who Marcus was now. "Mr. Davis is fine," Marcus replied evenly, shaking the offered hand. "My father and I prefer to keep our connection private most of the time." Of course, Phillips agreed quickly. "I understand completely. Privacy is important, especially for someone your age." Elijah placed a supportive hand on Marcus's shoulder. "My son has faced these kinds of situations before, Lawrence. The difference today is that he had the means to fight back through my connections. Most people who experience this treatment have no recourse." Phillips nodded uncomfortably. "We take these matters very seriously, Elijah. The employees involved have been removed from service pending a full investigation." "Removed from service," Elijah repeated contemplatively. "And if my son were just an ordinary teenager without connections to your potential business partner, would they still have been removed from service, or would they have removed him instead?" The question hung in the air, its answer obvious to everyone present. "Dad," Marcus said quietly, "I appreciate what you've done, but I don't want special treatment because of who you are. That's its own kind of problem." Elijah studied his son with pride. "You're right, and that's precisely why this needs to be about more than just you." Turning back to Phillips, Elijah continued, "Lawrence, our companies are on the verge of a significant partnership, one that could revolutionize airline security and passenger experience, but I need to know that I'm partnering with an organization that values all its customers equally." Phillips straightened his posture. "Absolutely, Elijah. Which is why I've already initiated a comprehensive review of our customer service policies." "Reviews are good," Elijah acknowledged. "Action is better. My son shouldn't have needed my intervention to be treated with basic dignity. As this conversation unfolded, the door opened and Mrs. Pearson burst in, followed by her husband, who appeared to be trying to restrain her. "There he is!" she exclaimed, pointing at Marcus. "That's the young man who refused to give up his seat. We've been flying with this airline for 30 years, and I've never been treated so poorly." The security personnel moved to intercept her, but Phillips held up a hand to stop them. His expression had hardened noticeably. "Mrs. Pearson, I presume?" he asked coolly. "Yes," she confirmed momentarily, taken aback by being addressed by the well-dressed executive. "And I demand to know why we weren't accommodated properly. My husband is a platinum member." Phillips glanced at an aide who nodded confirmation. "Mrs. Pearson, I understand you were upset about seating arrangements, but from what I've been told, you expected this young man to give up a seat he had legitimately purchased so that you could sit in first class despite having an economy ticket." "Well, yes, but," she began. "That's not how our seating policy works," Phillips interrupted firmly. "All passengers deserve the seats they've purchased. No passenger is entitled to displace another regardless of their age, race, or status." The direct rebuke from the airline's CEO left Mrs. Pearson momentarily speechless. Mr. Pearson took the opportunity to step forward. "We apologize for the confusion," he said, clearly embarrassed. "My wife was anxious about flying, and we hoped to sit together." "Then perhaps next time you should purchase 2 first-class tickets," Phillips suggested coldly. "Or accept the complimentary seats in economy that I understand were offered to both of you." The Pearsons retreated, escorted firmly but politely from the room by security personnel. As the door closed behind them, Phillips turned back to Elijah and Marcus. "I hope that demonstrates our commitment to addressing this issue properly," he said. Elijah appeared unmoved. "It's a start, but public reprimands after the fact aren't the same as preventing the problem in the first place." As the conversation continued, additional people entered the room, including several members of Elijah's executive team who had flown in specifically for this impromptu meeting. Marcus recognized his father's strategy, transforming a personal slight into an opportunity for systemic change by leveraging the full weight of his company's influence. The news of NextGen's acquisition of CyberShield had significantly strengthened Elijah's position. Atlantic Global Airways needed his company's security software more than his company needed their business, a fact everyone in the room clearly understood. As the adults launched into detailed discussions about policy changes and accountability measures, Marcus found himself momentarily forgotten. He used the opportunity to check his phone, finding dozens of notifications. The videos of his confrontation had gone viral, with major news outlets picking up the story and social media buzzing with commentary. One notification in particular caught his attention. A message from Zoe, whom he had exchanged contacts with before deplaning. "Just saw the news about your dad's company. Now I understand why the airline panicked. Hope you're using this moment to push for real change. Not everyone has a CEO dad to call when this happens." Her words resonated with what Marcus had been thinking throughout this ordeal. The privilege of having his father's influence had protected him today. But what about all the others who faced similar discrimination without such resources? As if sensing his thoughts, Elijah drew Marcus back into the conversation. "My son will be flying with your airline frequently during his internship at Columbia," he told Phillips. "I want your personal assurance that what happened today will lead to meaningful changes in how your staff treats all passengers, not just those with connections." Phillips nodded solemnly. "You have my word, Elijah. By the time Marcus flies with us again, we'll have implemented new training protocols for all customer-facing staff." "And the employees involved today," Elijah pressed. Phillips hesitated. "Initially, I planned to terminate them immediately, but no," Marcus interrupted, surprising everyone. "That's not what I want." All eyes turned to him. "Firing them doesn't solve the underlying problem," Marcus continued. "It just makes them bitter and reinforces their beliefs. What if instead they became part of the solution?" Elijah studied his son with interest. "What are you suggesting, Marcus Education?" Marcus replied simply, "Make them part of developing and implementing the new training. Let them learn why their actions were wrong and help prevent others from making the same mistakes. A thoughtful silence followed his suggestion. That's actually quite insightful, Phillips finally said. Genuine admiration in his voice. Rehabilitation rather than punishment. Elijah smiled proudly. My son has always seen solutions where others see only problems. It's why he'll make an exceptional engineer someday. As the meeting continued, plans took shape not just for addressing the immediate incident, but for creating lasting change within the airline's culture. What had begun as a humiliating confrontation was transforming into something much more significant, a catalyst for institutional reform. By the time Marcus and his father left the airport that evening, the world had already begun to react to both the viral videos of discrimination and the news of NextGen's strategic acquisition. The narrative was shifting from a simple case of airline misbehavior to a powerful example of how corporate influence could be leveraged for positive social change. You know, Elijah said as their car navigated through Manhattan's evening traffic, "You handled yourself exceptionally well today, son." Marcus looked out at the city lights. "I just did what you've always taught me. Stand my ground when I'm right, but find solutions that lift everyone up." Elijah nodded thoughtfully. Sometimes the most powerful response to discrimination isn't just fighting back. It's changing the system that allowed it to happen in the first place. As they approached their hotel, both father and son knew that what had transpired that day would have repercussions far beyond one flight or one airline. The reversal of fortune that Marcus had experienced was just the beginning of a much larger transformation. The morning light streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the luxury hotel suite, illuminating the Manhattan skyline beyond. Marcus sat at the glass desk, scrolling through his phone with a mixture of awe and discomfort. Overnight, the story had exploded across traditional and social media platforms. First class, while black was trending nationally with over 2 million posts and counting. Have you ever watched something small snowball into something much bigger than you ever imagined? Comment number 1. If you've ever been caught in a viral moment or witnessed someone standing up to discrimination, can you imagine being thrust into the spotlight? Like Marcus at just 17 years old, how would you handle suddenly becoming the face of a movement you never asked to lead? Hit that like button if you believe sometimes the most powerful moments of change come from ordinary people simply refusing to be mistreated. But what responsibility does Marcus now bear as the unwitting symbol of this growing movement? And how will he handle the mounting pressure from all sides? CNN wants an interview. Marcus called to his father, who was speaking quietly on his phone in the living area. So do MSNBC, Fox News, and The Today Show. Elijah ended his call and joined his son, glancing at the cascade of notifications on Marcus's phone. That's to be expected. Your video has over 7 million views now. The original clips captured by fellow passengers had been compiled into longer versions that tracked the entire confrontation. From Karen's initial questioning of Marcus's ticket to the dramatic reversal after his father's intervention. News organizations were running the footage alongside commentary about racial profiling in commercial settings. "I don't want to do interviews," Marcus said firmly. "This isn't about me seeking attention." Elijah nodded, respecting his son's decision. "You don't have to, but understand that your experience has resonated with millions of people who face similar treatment without the resources to fight back." As if to emphasize this point, Marcus's phone lit up with another notification. A direct message from someone he didn't know. "Thank you for standing your ground. Last month I was forced to give up my first-class seat for a white businessman, despite having paid full price. I complained, but nobody listened. Watching you fight back gave me hope." It was just one of hundreds of similar messages flooding and from across the country. Stories of black travelers who had been questioned, relocated, or removed from flights without justification. "It's not just about airlines either," Marcus observed, showing his father another message describing WA discrimination at a high-end restaurant. This has opened the floodgates for people sharing experiences across all kinds of businesses. The hotel phone rang, and Elijah answered it briefly before turning back to Marcus. That was Lawrence Phillips. Atlantic Global is calling a press conference for this afternoon to address what happened. They want us there. Marcus frowned. So they can show me off as proof that they're not racist. That would be their preferred narrative. Elijah agreed with a knowing smile. But we don't have to play along with their script. A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. When Elijah opened it, Zoe Washington stood in the hallway, dressed professionally in a tailored blue suit. "Hope I'm not intruding," she said. "Your assistant said I could stop by." "Not at all." Elijah welcomed her. "Marcus mentioned your conversation on the flight. I appreciate you supporting him through that situation." Zoe entered the suite, taking in the luxurious surroundings with an appreciative glance. "I came because I saw the press conference announcement. As someone who works in corporate marketing, I recognized a damage control operation when I see one." She set her leather portfolio on the coffee table and took a seat. "They're going to try to frame this as an isolated incident that's been resolved. Standard corporate playbook: apologize, announce some vague review of policies, maybe make a donation to the NLACP and hope everything blows over." Marcus joined them in the sitting area. "So what should we do instead?" "Elevate the conversation," Zoe suggested. "This isn't about one flight or one airline. It's about the everyday reality of navigating spaces as a Black person in America." She opened her portfolio, revealing printouts of dozens of similar incidents reported across major airlines over the past 5 years. Flight attendants questioning Black passengers, first-class ticket security being called without cause, and passengers being removed for non-compliance when they objected to discriminatory treatment. "I stayed up half the night gathering these." Zoe explained, "This is a systemic problem in the industry, not a few bad apple employees at Atlantic Global." Elijah studied the documents with growing resolve. "Marcus, this larger context changes. My thinking about the press conference, if you're willing your presence there, could help ensure they don't minimize what happened." Marcus considered this perspective. While he hadn't sought the spotlight, perhaps he had a responsibility to use it now that it had found him. "What would I need to do?" he asked. "Just be present," Zoe advised. "Your father and I can handle the corporate maneuvering. Sometimes the most powerful statement is simply showing up and refusing to let them control the narrative." As they discussed strategy for the afternoon's press conference, Marcus's phone continued to ping with notifications. One message caught his attention from Michael Reynolds, the civil rights attorney who had defended him on the flight. "Just saw the press conference announcement. Be careful. They'll try to use your presence to claim the issue is resolved. If you need legal perspective before attending, I'm available. This case has significant implications." The attorney's warning aligned with Zoe's assessment, reinforcing Marcus's growing understanding of how corporations typically handled these situations. The pattern was familiar: public apology token gestures and quick burial of the underlying issues. "There's something else to consider," Elijah said thoughtfully. "Our technology partnership with Atlantic Global. The acquisition announcement yesterday puts us in a unique position of leverage." Zoe nodded enthusiastically. "Exactly. You're not just a passenger they mistreated. You're the son of a major business partner. That changes the power dynamic entirely." Marcus looked between them, grappling with the complexity of the situation. "But isn't it wrong to use that privilege when others don't have it? Most people who face discrimination can't call a CEO." "That's precisely the point," Elijah replied. "We use our position to create change that benefits everyone, not just ourselves. The privilege would be wasted if we didn't leverage it for broader impact." As the conversation continued, Marcus reflected on his mother's teachings before she passed away 5 years earlier. She had always emphasized that privilege came with responsibility, that those with advantages had an obligation to create pathways for others. "My mother would say we should push for systemic change," Marcus said finally. "Not just apologies to me, but real policy changes that protect everyone." Elijah's expression softened at the mention of his late wife. "She would be incredibly proud of you right now, son." The moment was interrupted by another call, this time from Atlantic Global's PR team, asking to pre-brief them on the press conference format. Elijah put the call on speaker so everyone could hear. We've prepared a statement expressing our deepest apologies to Mr. Davis, the PR representative explained using Marcus's travel name. The CEO will announce a comprehensive review of our customer service policies and a new diversity training initiative. We'd like Mr. Davis to stand with our executives as a show of unity and reconciliation. Zoe and Elijah exchanged knowing glances exactly as predicted. That sounds incomplete, Elijah responded smoothly. Before confirming our attendance, we'd like to see specific commitments to measurable changes, not just reviews and training announcements. There was an uncomfortable pause on the line. Mr. Johnson, we understand your concerns, but we're still investigating the incident. Concrete policy changes take time to develop properly. Indeed they do, Elijah agreed. Which is why we've taken the liberty of preparing some suggestions based on similar incidents across the industry. My assistant will send them over shortly. We believe these could form the foundation of meaningful reform within Atlantic Global. After ending the call, Elijah turned to Marcus. The choice is still yours, son. You don't have to attend if you're uncomfortable with the publicity. Marcus thought about all the messages he'd received. People who had faced similar discrimination without recourse, without a platform, without the protection of a powerful parent. His discomfort with attention seemed insignificant compared to the opportunity to create real change. I'll go, he decided, but not as a prop for their narrative. We go on our terms. As they prepared for the press conference, Marcus received another message that crystallized the importance of what was happening. It was from a young black boy, no more than 12 based on his profile picture. My mum says I can be anything I want when I grow up, but sometimes people make me feel like I don't belong in nice places. Seeing you stand up for yourself makes me believe her. Marcus showed the message to his father without comment. No further explanation was needed. This was why they couldn't simply accept apologies and move on. The stakes were too high, the impact too far-reaching. The press conference would be just one step in a longer journey, but it was an important one. What had begun as a personal humiliation was transforming into something much more significant. A catalyst for addressing patterns of discrimination that affected countless others who never made headlines. As they left the hotel for Atlantic Global's corporate headquarters, Marcus understood that the true test wouldn't be what happened at today's press conference. But what changes would still be in place months and years later, when the cameras had moved on to other stories. The sleek lobby of Atlantic Global Airways' Manhattan headquarters bustled with unusual activity as security personnel established perimeters and communication staff directed media representatives to their designated areas. Glass and steel dominated the architecture, with the company's distinctive winged logo prominently displayed behind the reception desk. By the time Marcus, Elijah, and Zoe arrived, a significant media presence had already assembled. Far more than would typically attend a standard corporate announcement. They've moved it to their largest conference room, Zoe observed, as they were escorted through security. That suggests they're expecting significant attendance. Their guide, a nervous young woman from the PR department, led them to a private preparation room adjacent to the main conference space. Inside, Lawrence Phillips paced while assistants made last-minute adjustments to his appearance. Elijah Marcus, he greeted them with forced cordiality. Thank you for coming. We've incorporated some of your suggestions into our announcement today. Some Elijah questioned his tone, pleasant but firm. Phillips gestured for his assistants to leave before responding. The board felt that certain proposals required more thorough evaluation before we could commit to them publicly. I see, Elijah replied. And which proposals were those specifically? As the two executives launched into a detailed discussion of policy points, Marcus stepped to the side with Zoe. Through the partially open door, he could see media continuing to arrive. Not just travel reporters, but major network news teams. They're treating this like a major story, he observed quietly. Because it is, Zoe confirmed. Discrimination in commercial settings has been normalized for so long that it rarely makes headlines unless something extraordinary happens, like the CEO's son being mistreated, followed by a viral video and a major business deal. A commotion near the lobby entrance drew their attention. Two familiar figures were being escorted through security. Karen Whitley and Brent Taylor, the flight attendant and security officer from the incident. They brought them here, Marcus asked in surprise. Probably part of their strategy, Zoe assessed. Show that they're facing the issue head-on rather than hiding the employees involved. But something about Karen and Brent's demeanor seemed off. Rather than appearing contrite, they moved with the confidence of people who expected vindication. Marcus watched as they were led to a different waiting area, noting the supportive pats on the back they received from certain airline staff members. "Something doesn't feel right," he murmured. Before Zoe could respond, another arrival captured their attention. Michael Reynolds, the civil rights attorney from the flight, strode through the lobby with purposeful steps. When he spotted Marcus watching from the doorway, he gave a subtle nod before being directed to the main conference room. "Did you invite him?" Zoe asked. "No," Marcus replied, "but I'm glad he's here." A representative appeared to inform them that the press conference would begin in 5 minutes. Phillips excused himself to make final preparations, leaving Elijah, Marcus and Zoe to follow shortly after. Remember, Elijah advised his son, "You don't need to speak unless you want to. Your presence alone sends a powerful message." When they entered the main conference room, Marcus was momentarily overwhelmed by the sea of cameras and reporters. A podium bearing the Atlantic Global logo stood at the center of a small stage with chairs arranged to either side. Phillips gestured for them to take seats to his right. A calculated positioning meant to suggest unity with the company's response. Instead, Elijah guided Marcus and Zoe to seats slightly removed from the executive team, establishing visual independence from the corporate narrative. The subtle power move wasn't lost on the reporters, several of whom immediately began taking notes. Phillips approached the podium as cameras flashed and microphones were adjusted. His opening statement followed the expected corporate template. Expressions of regret, affirmations of company values, and promises of review and improvement. Atlantic Global Airways has a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination of any kind, he declared with practiced sincerity. The incident involving Mr. Davis was a serious failure to uphold that policy, and we take full responsibility. As Phillips continued, Marcus noticed Karen and Brent being seated on the opposite side of the stage, their expressions unreadable. Something about the choreography of their placement felt deliberate, almost theatrical. To demonstrate our commitment to addressing this incident transparently, Phillips continued, "We've invited the employees involved to participate in this conversation. Ms. Whitley and Mr. Taylor have agreed to make statements regarding their actions." Marcus exchanged a questioning glance with his father. This hadn't been mentioned during their earlier discussions. Elijah's slight frown suggested he was equally surprised by this development. Karen approached the podium first, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted the microphone. "I want to apologize for how the situation was handled." She began, her voice steady despite her apparent nervousness. "However, I need to clarify that my concerns about Mr. Davis's ticket were based on standard security protocols, not his race." Murmurs rippled through the assembled reporters. As Karen continued, "When passengers appear to be in the wrong cabin, particularly younger travelers were trained to verify their documentation. This helps prevent boarding pass mix-ups and potential security issues." The narrative she presented skillfully reframed her actions as professional diligence rather than discrimination, a security measure that would have been applied to any young passenger regardless of race. Brent followed with a similar statement emphasizing Atlantic Global's strict security requirements and his obligation to respond to crew concerns. "At no point was Mr. Davis's race a factor in my assessment of the situation," he insisted. Marcus watched as some reporters nodded along with these explanations. The initial outrage being subtly transformed into a misunderstanding about security protocols. The airline was executing a classic deflection strategy, acknowledging a poor customer experience while denying any racial component. Phillips returned to the podium building on the revised narrative. "While we acknowledge that our employees could have handled the situation with greater sensitivity, we want to be clear that Atlantic Global does not tolerate racial discrimination in any form." The implication was unmistakable. This wasn't discrimination. It was just poor customer service. To address these concerns, Phillips continued, "We're announcing a comprehensive customer service enhancement program and a review of our verification procedures to ensure all passengers are treated with respect." As Phillips outlined vague commitments to enhance training and review policies, Marcus felt a growing frustration. The airline was effectively minimizing what had happened, recasting a clear instance of racial profiling as a procedural misstep. Beside him, Elijah remained impassive, though Marcus recognized the slight tightening of his jaw a tell that his father was calculating his next move. When Phillips opened the floor for questions, the first came from a CNN reporter. "Phillips, the videos clearly show Ms. Whitley suggesting there must be a mistake with the ticket specifically, because it was held by a young black passenger. How does that align with your characterization of this as a security procedure rather than profiling?" Phillips began a careful response about context and training. But before he could finish, Michael Reynolds stood from his seat near the front. "If I may," the attorney interjected, "I was on that flight and witnessed the entire interaction. I'd like to add some crucial context that's being omitted here." Though clearly annoyed by the interruption, Phillips had little choice but to acknowledge Reynolds, whose presence as a witness gave his perspective unique weight. The flight attendant specifically stated that she found it difficult to believe someone your age would be so unaccommodating about giving up a first-class seat, Reynolds recounted. "Yet when I, a middle-aged white man, defended Mr. Davis, I was immediately offered an upgrade on a future flight, rather than being questioned about my own seat assignment." Reynolds' precise recollection silenced the room. Additionally, he continued, "I heard Ms. Whitley question how someone like that could afford first class. I'm curious what aspect of Mr. Davis beyond his race would prompt such a comment." The pointed question hung in the air as reporters furiously took notes. Phillips attempted to regain control of the narrative, but the damage had been done. Reynolds had effectively challenged the sanitized version of events the airline was presenting. At that moment, Marcus made a decision. Leaning toward his father, he whispered, "I want to speak." Elijah studied his son's face before nodding. "Are you sure?" "Yes," Marcus confirmed. "They're trying to rewrite what happened. I need to set the record straight." When Marcus raised his hand to indicate he wished to address the room, Phillips could hardly refuse him. The victim at the center of the incident, everyone had gathered to discuss. As Marcus approached the podium, cameras focused on his young H. Despite his youth, he carried himself with remarkable poise, adjusting the microphone with steady hands. "My name is Marcus Johnson Davis." He began using both his father's surname and his mother's maiden name publicly for the first time. "I'm 17 years old and was traveling to New York for a summer internship at Columbia University when this incident occurred." The room fell completely silent, riveted by the young man's calm demeanor. "I want to address a few points that have been mischaracterized today. First, my ticket was questioned immediately upon boarding before any security concerns could possibly have been assessed. Second, when the Pearsons arrived, Ms. Whitley didn't ask if I would be willing to move. She informed me that I should move, suggesting it was the right thing for someone my age to do." Marcus paused, making eye contact with reporters before continuing. "Most importantly, this wasn't an isolated incident. Since this story broke, I've received hundreds of messages from black travelers who've had nearly identical experiences. Being asked to verify their tickets repeatedly, being pressured to give up seats they paid for, or being treated as suspicious for simply being in premium cabins." He gestured toward Karen and Brent. "I don't believe Ms. Whitley and Mr. Taylor are bad people. I believe they, like many others, have unconscious biases that affect how they perceive and treat people who look like me. That's why I don't want them fired. I want them and Atlantic Global to acknowledge these biases and commit to addressing them honestly." The authenticity of Marcus's statement was undeniable, shifting the energy in the room dramatically. When he returned to his seat, Phillips appeared visibly uncomfortable, aware that his carefully constructed narrative had been effectively dismantled by the teenager's measured testimony. Before Phillips could respond, Elijah rose and approached the podium. "As Marcus's father and as CEO of Next Gen Technologies, I want to be clear about our expectations moving forward, he stated. We came here today expecting meaningful commitments to change, not a reformulation of the problem. He turned to face Phillips directly. Lawrence, our companies are still negotiating a significant partnership, one that would be beneficial for both organizations, but that partnership must be built on shared values, including a genuine commitment to addressing bias at all levels. The implicit threat was clear. The lucrative deal between their companies hung in the balance. To that end, Elijah continued, I'm prepared to offer NextGen's resources to help develop truly effective anti-bias training programs based on measurable outcomes, not just good intentions. We're also willing to delay our formal partnership announcement by 30 days to give Atlantic Global time to demonstrate concrete steps toward implementation. The business implications of this public proposal sent reporters into a frenzy of note-taking and photographers capturing the moment. Phillips, caught between corporate interests and public perception, had little choice but to appear receptive. We welcome NextGen's expertise and look forward to developing this initiative together. He managed his forced smile, barely concealing his discomfort at having the terms dictated so publicly. As the press conference concluded, reporters swarmed around Marcus, Elijah, and Zoe, peppering them with questions that they skillfully deflected with promises of a more detailed statement in the coming days. Making their way through the crowd toward the exit, they found Michael Reynolds waiting for them. That was quite a power move, the attorney commented to Elijah with undisguised admiration, leveraging a business deal for social change. Business and social responsibility aren't separate concerns, Elijah replied. At least they shouldn't be. Reynolds handed Marcus his card. If you ever need legal perspective on any of this, I'd be honored to help. What you did today wasn't just brave, it was strategically brilliant. As they departed the building, Marcus noticed a small group gathered outside. Ordinary people holding hastily made signs supporting him and thanking him for speaking out. Some were in airline uniforms, suggesting that Atlantic Global employees themselves were divided on the issue. Among them stood a young black flight attendant who approached cautiously. I just wanted to say thank you, she said quietly to Marcus. Things like this happen more than anyone admits, but nobody ever hears about it. You've given a voice to so many of us who can't speak up. As their car pulled away from the curb, Marcus reflected on the unexpected turn his journey had taken. What had begun as a simple flight to an internship had somehow become the catalyst for a corporate reckoning on race and discrimination. The resolution was only beginning, but the path forward was clearer than it had been just 24 hours earlier. 1 week after the viral confrontation and subsequent press conference, Marcus sat in the sunlit study of his father's Manhattan apartment, reviewing the settlement offer that had arrived via courier that morning. The document, bound in an expensive leather portfolio bearing Atlantic Global's embossed logo, detailed a substantial financial offer alongside extensive non-disclosure provisions. $500,000, Zoe observed, looking over his shoulder. That's their price for your silence. In the days following the press conference, public opinion had continued to build against the airline. Additional videos of the incident had surfaced, contradicting Karen and Brent's sanitized accounts. Social media campaigns had emerged calling for boycotts, and competitors had begun subtly positioning themselves as more inclusive alternatives in their advertising. The settlement offer was Atlantic Global's attempt to make the problem disappear, a standard corporate strategy. When public relations disasters threatened the bottom line, Elijah joined them, coffee cup in hand. What are you thinking, son? Marcus closed the portfolio deliberately. I'm thinking that this isn't just about me anymore. Over the past week, he had received thousands of messages from people sharing similar experiences, not just on airlines, but in restaurants, hotels, high-end stores, and countless other spaces where black presence was still sometimes treated as inherently suspicious. Many reached out specifically because they knew they would never receive the corporate attention that Marcus's case had generated. If I take this money and sign their confidentiality agreement, nothing really changes, Marcus reasoned. They pay me off, issue some vague statement about resolving the matter, and everything goes back to normal until it happens to someone else. Elijah nodded, having anticipated this response. There are other approaches we could consider, Before they could discuss alternatives, the apartment's intercom buzzed the security desk, announced the arrival of Michael Reynolds, who had become an informal advisor to the family since the press conference. When the attorney entered the study minutes later, his expression suggested he already knew about the settlement offer. "They sent their standard package, I see," Reynolds commented, gesturing toward the portfolio. "Let me guess. Significant financial compensation coupled with comprehensive non-disclosure requirements." "You've seen this before," Elijah observed. Reynolds nodded grimly more times than I can count. "It's the corporate playbook for handling discrimination cases when the evidence is too strong to deny, pay for silence, make public statements about learning and growing, and continue business as usual." The attorney set his briefcase on the desk, retrieving several files. "Since the press conference, my office has been contacted by 27 other passengers who experienced similar treatment on Atlantic Global flights within the past year alone. None received the corporate attention that Marcus did." He spread several complaints across the desk, documented instances of black passengers being questioned about first-class tickets moved from premium seats despite valid bookings or subjected to extra security scrutiny without cause. "This is systemic," Reynolds concluded, "not isolated incidents." Marcus studied the documents, recognizing patterns identical to his own experience. "So what alternatives do we have besides taking their money or filing a lawsuit?" Reynolds smiled appreciatively at the question. "I've been giving that considerable thought. Traditional litigation has its place, but it's slow, expensive, and often results in the same confidential settlements we're trying to avoid. What if we propose something more innovative?" Over the next hour, they outlined a different approach, one that prioritized systemic change over personal compensation. By the time they finished, a framework had emerged that could potentially transform how Atlantic Global addressed racial bias throughout its organization. The following morning, Marcus, Elijah, and Reynolds arrived at Atlantic Global's headquarters for a meeting with Lawrence Phillips and the airline's legal team. The executives clearly expected a negotiation over settlement terms, perhaps a request for more money or modified confidentiality provisions. What they received instead was something entirely different. "We're declining your settlement offer," Marcus stated calmly as the meeting began sliding the unopened portfolio back across the conference table. Phillips leaned forward, confusion evident in his expression. "I assure you, Mr. Davis, our offer is quite generous by any standard if the amount is unsatisfactory." "The amount is irrelevant." Marcus interrupted, his voice steady despite his youth. "I'm not interested in being paid for my silence." Reynolds placed a document folder on the table. "Instead, we're proposing an alternative resolution, one that addresses the systemic issues rather than simply compensating Marcus for his individual experience." As Phillips and his legal team reviewed the proposal, their expression shifted from confusion to obvious concern rather than a counter-demand for money. They were looking at a comprehensive program for institutional change. 1. The creation of an independent review board to evaluate customer complaints related to discrimination with representation from civil rights organizations and diverse community members. 2. Mandatory Antibious training for all customer-facing staff, designed and evaluated by experts in the field rather than generic corporate trainers. 3. Transparent reporting of discrimination complaints and resolutions published annually for public review. 4. A mentorship program specifically designed to increase diversity in leadership positions within the airline. 5. Most significantly, the establishment of the Johnson Protocol, a standardized procedure for handling seating disputes that removed individual employee discretion and potential bias from the equation. "This is extensive," Phillips finally said, setting down the document. "It's necessary," Elijah countered, "and considerably less expensive than the class action lawsuit that Mr. Reynolds is prepared to file on behalf of the 27 other passengers who have already contacted his office with similar complaints." The implied threat hung in the air, reinforced by Reynolds's measured nod of confirmation. "We're offering you a choice," Marcus explained. "You can fight a public, protracted legal battle that will cost millions in legal fees and incalculable damage to your brand, or you can become a leader in addressing an industry-wide problem." Phillips studied Marcus with new respect, recognizing that the teenager had effectively maneuvered the airline into a corner. The corporate executive glanced at his legal team, who seemed to be calculating the potential costs of each option. "What about the employees involved?" Phillips asked. "Ms. Whitley and Mr. Taylor." "That's actually where our proposal differs most significantly from standard procedures," Marcus replied. "Instead of terminating them, which would likely only reinforce their resentment, we suggest making them part of the solution." He outlined a rehabilitation-focused approach, one where Karen and Brent would participate in developing the new training protocols, sharing their perspectives on how implicit biases had influenced their actions, and working directly with the independent review board to improve the airline's response to similar situations. "Punishment without education changes nothing," Marcus explained. "But giving them the opportunity to become part of the solution could transform not just their understanding, but the culture of your entire organization." Philip sat back in his chair, clearly reassessing the young man across the table. What had initially appeared to be a standard discrimination complaint had evolved into something much more sophisticated. A comprehensive blueprint for institutional reform. "Your father has clearly taught you well about leverage in negotiations," Phillips observed with grudging admiration. "My father taught me about business," Marcus corrected. "My mother taught me about justice." This proposal honors both lessons. After a lengthy discussion of implementation details and timelines, Phillips reluctantly agreed to present the proposal to Atlantic Global's board of directors with a decision promised within 72 hours. As they left the meeting, Reynolds clapped Marcus on the shoulder. "That was masterfully done. Most people would have taken the money. Most people don't have the privilege of being able to refuse it," Marcus acknowledged. "That's exactly why I couldn't accept it. This has to be about more than just me." 3 days later, the answer came. Atlantic Global's board had approved the proposal with minor modifications to implementation timelines. What had begun as a humiliating confrontation over a first-class seat was transforming into a model for how corporations could address systemic discrimination when properly motivated to do so. The announcement generated a new wave of media attention, with business publications analyzing the potential industry-wide implications and civil rights organizations cautiously praising the airline's commitment to measurable change rather than merely symbolic gestures. For Marcus, however, the most meaningful responses came not from media outlets, but from individual messages. People inspired by his refusal to accept personal compensation in favor of systemic reform. One message in particular captured the significance of his decision. It came from Jasmine, the sympathetic flight attendant who had quietly supported him during the original confrontation. "What you've done will change things for all of us, not just passengers, but crew members of color who've been afraid to speak up about what we see happening. You had every right to take their money and walk away. Thank you for choosing the harder path instead." As summer progressed and Marcus began his internship at Columbia, reports filtered back from Atlantic Global employees about the implementation of the new policies. The Johnson Protocol was being developed with input from diverse stakeholders, and the first round of enhanced amphibious training had begun with Karen Whitley surprisingly emerging as one of its most committed participants. What had started as a personal humiliation had catalyzed a transformation that would potentially benefit thousands of travelers who would never know Marcus's name, but would experience the effects of his transformative decision. 6 months later, Marcus stood in the same Atlanta International Airport, this time preparing to board a flight back to New York for his second semester at Columbia. The early January chill had necessitated heavier clothing than his previous journey, but otherwise the scene appeared similar. Crowded terminals, hurried travelers, and the constant hum of airport announcements. Yet much had changed since that fateful day in June. The Johnson Protocol had been fully implemented across Atlantic Global Airways, establishing clear guidelines for handling seating disputes that removed subjective judgment from the process. The airline's amphibious training program had been expanded to all staff members, not just those in customer-facing roles. Most significantly, Atlantic Global had appointed its first black female chief flight attendant. A 20-year veteran named Diana Wilson, who had previously been passed over for promotion despite her exemplary record. Marcus approached the gate for his flight boarding pass in hand. As he joined the priority line, he noticed with mild surprise that Karen Whitley was working the gate, checking boarding passes with professional efficiency. She recognized him immediately, her expression flickering with momentary discomfort before settling into something more complex. A mixture of embarrassment and determination. "Mr. Davis," she acknowledged, scanning his boarding pass. "It's good to see you again." The simple greeting contained no trace of the condescension that had characterized their first interaction. Marcus nodded politely, noting the small pin on her uniform lapel that identified her as a cultural awareness ambassador, part of the new program she had helped develop. "How has the implementation been going?" Marcus asked as she returned his boarding pass. Karen seemed surprised by the question, but answered thoughtfully. "It's been educational, challenging sometimes, but necessary." She hesitated before adding, "I've learned a lot about perspectives I never considered before." As Marcus proceeded down the jet bridge, he reflected on the complex nature of change, how it rarely followed a straight line, and often began with uncomfortable self-examination. Karen's transformation from antagonist to advocate hadn't been immediate or simple, but it appeared genuine. Aboard the aircraft, Marcus was greeted by a flight crew that reflected noticeably more diversity than his previous flight. The head flight attendant, a black woman in her 50s with a name tag reading Diana Wilson, chief attendant, welcomed passengers with warm professionalism. Settling into his first-class seat, Marcus observed the boarding process with interest. When an elderly couple entered, not the Pearsons, but similar in appearance, they presented their boarding passes to Wilson, who directed them to their separate seats with courteous efficiency. There was no suggestion that another passenger should be displaced to accommodate their preference to sit together. The systematic change was subtle, but significant fair treatment applied consistently rather than selectively. As boarding continued, Marcus was surprised to see Zoe Washington making her way down the aisle. She spotted him and broke into a delighted smile. "Marcus, what are the odds?" she exclaimed, taking the seat beside him. "I'm heading to New York for a conference. I didn't realize you were flying today." "Back to Columbia for spring semester," he explained. "How have you been?" Zoe's smile widened. "Actually, I have news. Atlantic Global recruited me last month. I'm their new Vice President of Diversity and Customer Experience. I start next week." "That's fantastic," Marcus replied sincerely. "They couldn't have made a better choice. It's a direct result of everything that happened with your case," Zoe acknowledged. "They created the position specifically to ensure the new protocols are properly implemented." Their conversation was briefly interrupted when Marcus noticed two familiar figures boarding the plane. The Pearsons looking noticeably subdued compared to their previous encounter. Mrs. Pearson made eye contact with Marcus, but quickly looked away, clearly uncomfortable with the recognition. "The Pearsons completed the sensitivity training program last month," Zoe explained, following his gaze. "It was a condition of maintaining their frequent flyer status after multiple complaints were filed against them." The revelations surprised Marcus. "I wouldn't have expected them to agree to that." "People can surprise you," Zoe replied. "Sometimes negative experiences become opportunities for growth if they're willing to learn from them." As the flight prepared for departure, Marcus received a text message from his father. "Harvard Business School just added your case study to their curriculum. The Johnson Protocol Transforming Corporate Response to Bias is now required reading for their Corporate Social Responsibility course. Your mother would be incredibly proud." The news filled Marcus with quiet satisfaction. The incident that had begun with humiliation had evolved into an educational tool that would influence future business leaders, creating ripples of change far beyond one airline or one passenger's experience. Midway through the flight, Captain Williams, the same pilot who had captained Marcus's original journey, made his way from the cockpit to personally greet him. "Mr. Davis," the captain said, extending his hand, "I wanted to thank you personally for what you've accomplished these past months. The changes you initiated have made a real difference in how we operate." Marcus accepted the handshake. "I'm glad to hear that. Has the implementation been difficult?" "Change always is," Williams acknowledged candidly. "But necessary change is worth the effort. The Johnson Protocol has actually made our jobs easier in many ways. Clear guidelines mean fewer judgment calls in difficult situations. As Williams returned to the cockpit, Marcus noticed a young black woman in economy looking uncomfortable as a flight attendant questioned her about something. Without hesitation, Marcus pressed his call button. When a flight attendant responded, he quietly explained his concern that the passenger might be experiencing unfair scrutiny. The attendant nodded respectfully and went to investigate. Minutes later, Marcus saw the young woman being escorted to an empty first-class seat with an apologetic smile from the crew. When she passed his row, she gave Marcus a grateful nod of recognition, not for his intervention specifically, but for being someone who noticed and cared enough to speak up. The moment crystallized something important for Marcus. True change wasn't just about policy documents or training programs, though those were essential foundations. It was about creating a culture where people felt empowered to recognize and address potential injustice, even when it didn't affect them directly. As the plane began its descent into JFK, Marcus reflected on how different this journey was from his previous one. The same airline, the same route, even some of the same staff. Yet everything had changed because people had been willing to acknowledge problems and commit to addressing them. When the plane touched down and passengers began gathering their belongings, Zoe turned to Marcus with a thoughtful expression. "You know what happened with you, and Atlantic Global is being studied as a model for effective corporate response to discrimination. Several other airlines have already adopted versions of the Johnson Protocol." "That's good to hear." Marcus replied, genuinely pleased by the wider impact. "But there's something even more significant that's happened." Zoe continued, "Your story has helped people understand that standing firm against discrimination isn't just about individual victories. It's about creating systemic change that benefits everyone." As they made their way through the terminal, Marcus noticed people occasionally glancing his way with expressions of recognition. His story had resonated far beyond what he could have imagined when he simply refused to give up a seat he had rightfully purchased. Outside the airport, as they prepared to go their separate ways, Zoe offered Marcus a parting thought. "The most powerful thing about what you did wasn't refusing to move from your seat. It was refusing to accept individual compensation in exchange for silence." Marcus nodded, understanding the distinction. Individual remedies don't fix broken systems. "Exactly." Zoe agreed. "And that's the lesson people have taken from your experience, that sometimes standing firm isn't just about personal dignity. It's about creating pathways for others who don't have the same privileges or platform." As Marcus caught a taxi toward Columbia's campus, he thought about the unexpected journey that had begun with a simple flight 6 months earlier. What had started as a personal confrontation had evolved into something much more significant, a catalyst for change that would continue to influence how companies address discrimination long after the specific details of his experience faded from public memory. The taxi passed through Manhattan's busy streets, the city pulsing with energy and possibility. Marcus knew that the work of creating truly equitable spaces was far from complete, both in the travel industry and in our society at large. But he had learned firsthand that persistence and strategic leverage could transform individual incidents into opportunities for systemic improvement. In that knowledge lay a powerful lesson that each person who refused to accept discrimination, who stood firm in the face of injustice, contributed to a larger movement toward the world they wanted to create. Marcus's stand had been amplified by his father's influence. But its true power came from connecting to the experiences of countless others who had faced similar treatment without recourse. As the taxi approached Columbia's campus, Marcus's phone pinged with a final message from his father. "Your mother always said that privilege isn't just something you benefit from. It's something you leverage for those who don't have it. You've honored her memory by doing exactly that. I couldn't be prouder of the man you're becoming." In that moment, Marcus understood that new beginnings weren't just about moving forward. They were about carrying forward the lessons of the past to create better paths for the future. What can we learn from Marcus's experience? This story illuminates powerful truths about confronting racism in America today. First, individual dignity must sometimes be defended with unwavering resolve, as Marcus demonstrated by refusing to surrender his rightfully purchased seat. Second, true change requires addressing systems, not just incidents. Marcus's greatest impact came not from winning his personal battle, but from transforming airline policies to protect future travelers. The story also reveals the double-edged nature of privilege. Marcus's access to corporate power through his father was undeniably advantageous. But he used this privilege responsibly, leveraging it not just for personal vindication, but for collective improvement. This teaches us that privilege carries responsibility. Perhaps most importantly, Marcus showed us that sustainable change often requires education rather than punishment. By advocating for Karen and Brent's rehabilitation instead of termination, he demonstrated that transforming perspectives ultimately creates more lasting impact than simply removing problem individuals. Marcus's journey reminds us that standing firm against discrimination isn't just about personal dignity. It's about creating pathways for everyone to be treated with equity and respect. Sometimes the most powerful response to injustice is refusing to accept individual remedies for systemic problems. Thank you so much for joining me for this powerful story about standing up against racism and making real change. Has something similar ever happened to you or someone you know? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. What would you have done in Marcus's position? Would you have taken the settlement money or fought for systemic change like he did? If this story moved you, please hit that like button to help others find it. Consider subscribing to our channel for more stories about overcoming discrimination and creating positive change in our world. And don't forget to share this with someone who needs to hear this message of courage and transformation. Until next time, remember that each of us has the power to stand firm when faced with injustice. And sometimes that stand can create ripples of change that touch countless lives beyond our own. Thank you for watching, and I wish you the courage to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult.